Hi, I'm Abdul Saad, and I'm coming to you today as we enter into a new phase together as a human family with the COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic and crisis that is facing the human family. And appropriately for the talk that I have set out to give at this time, it is being done with a great deal of solemnity and somberness and sadness for what the human family is currently facing. And first and foremost, what we are facing in terms of the loss of human life, especially of our precious elderly, and the heartbreaking scenes coming out of Italy and Spain of our precious elderly dying desperate deaths, all alone, unable to be comforted by their families. And the images of the mass graves, the global confusion, the fear, the grief. This is a time where we all need to step up and we all need to be real. So what I want to do this session or this talk is to take a more bigger picture, more of a philosophical view, more of to zoom out, because I think this is what we need before we get into specifics of strategies or how do we cope, which is very, very important. And so much good work is being put out there online, so much goodwill, people stepping up, leaders in all fields, ordinary people. This is really a time for us to step up as a human family. So on that note, given the gravity of the situation we are facing, what I want to do is to talk about navigating a COVID-19 world, psychological and spiritual dimensions, as a starting point for a conversation. And in future weeks, in future videos, what I plan to do is focus on more practical strategies, approaches relating to stress management, other topics, and if you have suggestions or questions in the comments section, that will help me in terms of topics I want to discuss. But let's get started. So what I want to cover today is very briefly what is COVID-19, what this crisis can reveal to us about ourselves and the world we live in, and how this can help us find our way through the panic and confusion. So we all know that COVID-19 is a novel infectious viral disease that was first identified in December 2019. It's highly contagious through droplets, and in the vulnerable can lead to a attack on the respiratory system, in particular the lungs, which can lead to pneumonia and death. We can get into the underlying issues there in terms of people that are immunocompromised at another time, but in general, elderly, immunocompromised, medically compromised, people that do not have access to clean water, sanitation. Obviously, all of these individuals are at greater risk from an infectious disease. Now, the virus has led to either directly or indirectly to 35,000 recorded deaths at the time of recording. Billions of people worldwide are in some state of lockdown or quarantine, and there's mass panic, fear, and uncertainty in the global population. There's mass grief, sadness, loss, and human misery. As I said, the thousands of elderly in Italy who have succumbed to this horrible disease and died lonely deaths. The frontline workers, the doctors and nurses, the pastoral care workers that have also succumbed to the disease, intending to the infirm. There's mass confusion within the human family and fear also regarding the potential weaponization of the pandemic for political and economic agendas. That's also part of the discussion. That's also floating out there in the collective consciousness. And of course, the economic uncertainty and hardship, the measures that are used to contain the virus. We all have, in recent weeks, become aware of social distancing and quarantine and isolation. These measures have directly impacted the ability of many, many millions of people to independently earn their income, house themselves, feed themselves, provide shelter. And this is creating great levels of fear and uncertainty regarding the future. And in terms of the economic future, talks of a recession or a depression is creating mass fear in the population. And obviously this also has led to mass disruption to our usual busy, fast-paced lifestyles. Mass school closures, mass unemployment, never seen before levels of panic buying, and the intensification of political and ideological differences between people as people enter into a state of mass fear. And one of the key points regarding COVID-19 is no one has been spared. The poorest, most oppressed and malnourished humans on this earth stand to lose their lives and endure further indignity and oppression. I saw a clip yesterday of homeless people in India lining up for food in the most abysmal circumstances, being dehumanized. And that's nothing against India per se, but it was just something that came on the news in terms of the mass poverty of mass pockets of the Indian population and the devastation this is causing to laborers and workers who would go to the cities to earn a living, come back to the countryside, mass devastation. So the poorest, most oppressed and malnourished humans on this earth stand to lose their lives. Those dependent on government stand to lose even more of their dignity and potentially freedoms and pay with greater levels of fear. The middle class stand to lose their livelihoods, businesses and way of life. The wealthy stand to lose their sense of security, which their money and assets have up until now provided them, but there's nowhere to run or hide. And the 1% stand to lose control as humanity awakens from their enslavement in a system built on debt and paper money. And if there was ever a time to speak our minds in a compassionate and intelligent way, this is the time. This is the time. So questions being asked: how long will this last? How will I survive if I ran out of money? What could be next? What could happen? What will happen to my livelihood? When will we be back to normal? Why doesn't the government just, etc.? Will life and society ever be the same again? Who is to blame? Will science save us? Is this punishment from God? And crises and the questions they raise are an opportunity to wake up from complacency, to be curious about ourselves, our world and our role in it, an opportunity to reevaluate our life course and to truly understand what controls us and what we have given up our authority to. So what we need in this moment of mass fear and panic and wounding and confusion within the human family is an ability to see the forest for the trees. We need holistic thinking. Because knowledge of specifics, but ignorance of the basic principles within which those specifics operate, will always lead to confusion, doubt, and compound error, whether now or later. So we need to understand the principles, because this gives us a strategic advantage. We need a framework to make sense of what's happening and to see ourselves through to the other side of this. So to illustrate this point of that the knowledge of specifics is not enough, and how COVID-19 and the COVID-19 world is really proving this, we may have knowledge of finance but never attain abundance. We may have knowledge of health but never attain vitality. We may have knowledge of psychology but never attain wisdom. And we may have knowledge of theology but never attain intimacy with God. And this is where the bigger picture is the tale of the two world views here, of what are the invisible isms ruling the world in which COVID-19 has come. And I want to demonstrate the vision of the world, the vision of reality, with a number of quotes. The first one is Francis Crick, the late great scientist who was co-founded the DNA molecule, the structure of DNA, the double helix. And Francis Crick said, I myself, like many scientists, believe that the soul is imaginary, and that what we call our minds is simply a way of talking about the functions of our brains. Another quote, Richard Dawkins. We are machines built by DNA whose purpose is to make more copies of the same DNA. This is exactly what we are for. We are machines for propagating DNA. And the propagation of DNA is a self-sustaining process. It is every living object's sole reason for living. And contrast it with this. It is the rationalism of frogs living at the bottom of wells to deny the existence of mountains. This is logic of a kind, but it has nothing to do with reality. And that was the late, great Frithjof Schuon, arguably the premier metaphysician of the 20th century. So what am I getting at here with these quotes? What am I getting at here with taking this more philosophical approach? Well, what I'm getting at is the world in which COVID-19 has emerged is ruled by certain invisible isms. And chief amongst these isms is materialism. And materialism is the philosophy, the ideology, the belief system, the worldview that only the physical is real, that matter is the substrate of all reality. All reality is ultimately material. Consciousness is fully explained by brain states. Humans are machines for propagating DNA. We can achieve happiness and perfection if we ensure our material needs are fully satisfied and equally distributed. These are some of the hallmarks of materialism. And what you notice there is that most of the isms masquerading today as uniquely different, such as capitalism versus socialism, are all fundamentally based on materialism. So materialism leads to what is known as the atomization of reality, breaking reality down to its most base component parts. And this has infiltrated every facet of our lives. Another quote from Helen Dahr, who is a professor of commerce. She says, quote, materialism has become an integral part of consumers' economic activities and modern day living, with mainly negative consequences reported from materialists' lifestyle. Some of the reported negative consequences of materialism are increasing consumer debt and bankruptcy, shrinking savings, economic crisis, and lower levels of life satisfaction and well-being. And this comes out of an article from the Journal of Economics and Behavioral Studies entitled Antecedents and Consequences of Materialism, an Integrated Theoretical Framework. So again, what I'm setting the scene here is for the world which COVID-19 has visited and is devastating, and why the world we live in is based on certain invisible isms that has created this house of cards society that COVID-19 is exposing. So from the article again by Helen Helen D-U-H. And I think these are worth reading. Even in an affluent society such as Iceland, where the per capita GDP in 2007 was $63,830, compared to $45,845 in the US, one would expect the majority of the citizens to be able to adequately sustain themselves from their income. However, reports that because of materialism and unsecured lending, Icelanders on average are living way beyond their means. This has caused consumer debt to rise to about 255% of aggregate disposable income in 2008. When citizens are materialistic, consumers consume more and borrow more money. Bank employees make very risky and highly untenable loans to customers. Nations pursue highly competitive forms of capitalism with little governmental regulation. Remember, this isn't capitalism versus socialism. I don't buy into that, because both are based on materialism. So materialism does not only deplete personal income, it does also have negative consequences on the natural environment, because nature's resources are being used on and on. Furthermore, studies on the psychological correlates of materialism have mainly focused on the psychological consequences rather than the causes. Researchers have consistently proven that there is a negative relationship between materialism and psychological well-being or life satisfaction. Materialistic ambitions, even when successfully pursued, are relatively empty in terms of potential well-being benefits. The research findings show that highly materialistic business students in Singapore reported increased unhappiness, anxiety, etc., etc. Okay. In Australia, we see, my country, an article from the 18th of November 2019, ABC News, the state news agency. Household debt has Australia living in house of cards. And if you could see the article, it's literally a house of cards in the picture. When it comes to household debt, Australians are world record holders. We've got household debt to income on just a touch under 200%. And that, in my view, is a massive macro risk. Gerard Minack, economist and principal. It is literally a house of cards, and he has his fingers crossed that we do not head into a recession in the next 10 years. And then following in the article is the $1 million mortgage, which is the average now in Australia. If you want to own a home, your average mortgage is $1 million. That's one with 6 zeros. So what does this materialistic ethos and philosophy of modern society, this atomization of reality to its most base parts, consumerism, production, efficiency, status, success, accumulation, what that lack of integration leads to is disintegration. So modern society, as the article says, has become a house of cards. It's marked by a lack of integration. And this is what COVID is proving, because we have a healthcare system that manages disease for profit, an economic system that rewards recklessness, greed, and incentivizes risk, and an education system that promotes ideology over wisdom. So When you have a society that's like a house of cards, one little thing can cause the whole thing to come crashing down because it's not functioning as an integrated, unified whole. And what do you call that when something doesn't function as an integrated, unified whole, when it's actually working at cross purposes? That's called dis-ease. Disease. Dis-ease is the result of a lack of an integration. So imagine your body working against itself, where each system was working in opposition to the health and vitality of your life force, of your cell's ability to create energy. Could you ever achieve health and vitality? So why would we expect it to be any different when it comes to human society? A society where these are conservative estimates, 40 to 60% of low-income earners have blood levels of vitamin C so low that they virtually have scurvy. A disease many think has been eliminated. It hasn't. A society where our elderly are being drugged at alarming rates. And I don't use that word to be an alarmist. That's the literature. It's called polypharmacy, or the problem of polypharmacy amongst the elderly, which COVID-19 has the potential to devastate because of the immunocompromised state of many of our elderly, owing in part, it could be argued, to polypharmacy, poor nutrition, the whole disintegrated health system we have, which now the economic system has to be completely crashed in order to deal with the shortcomings of the health system. So it's like we have a problem with the kidneys, but we've got to destroy the liver to heal the kidneys, right? This is the lack of integration, which a lot of people aren't understanding why these measures become necessary when there is this lack of integration. You've got to take aggressive measures. You've got to do the chemotherapy to destroy all the cells, because the approach of treatment, the approach of dealing with things, is not functioning on unified principles. So we have our elderly drugged at alarming rates, the problem of polypharmacy, their bodies ravaged by low nutrient foods, and we expect no ill effects, no deaths and no disruption. So COVID-19 is really showing us the absurdity, amongst other things, the absurdity of our age, where now hand sanitizer and toilet paper are more valuable than diamonds. What will your diamonds give you? Right? Where toilet paper now is the currency, and rice and pasta and hand sanitizer. And this is the folly of the materialistic worldview. So we have an opportunity to re-examine, to reassess, to reflect, to take stock. But something hijacks this opportunity, and something has the potential to hijack this opportunity, this momentous time, this momentous moment in history. Something has the potential to rob us of our potential and convince us we are powerless. And that something is fear, and panic and confusion and alarmism. Fear is our greatest thief. Listen to these words and get a sense of the energetic resonance they create in your body. Because this is what you're being hit with every day by the media. Death, disease, debt, economic crash, foreclosure, insurance, control, surveillance, lockdown. But even worse than fear is the fear of fear. The anticipation of what could happen. The what ifs. Because these are what make us lose more and more of our authority. Because fear looks for what is outside of itself to rescue and save it. But in many respects, when it comes to anticipatory anxiety and fear, what I'm finding in speaking with people and speaking to clients and coaching is that my most anxious patients and clients are now amongst the calmest, because in many respects the worst is happening. We don't have to anticipate anymore, and we're still here, and you're still here, and I'm still here, and you will face this with courage. Imagine if a year ago you were told about this pandemic and the impact it would have on your life. You probably would have predicted you couldn't have coped, but you're coping, you're here. And this brings to mind a story of that I heard. I'm not sure how true it is, but it's very powerfully illustrative of the effect of fear. The story of the flight attendant who before every flight would make earnest prayers to the Creator, to God the Almighty, who we need in this moment. Humanity needs. And we need to grow up when it comes to the G word. Please grow up. Call it whatever you want. If you've got some phobic response to the G word, like Carolyn Mace says, get over it. Get over it. God, Mother Nature, Spirit, Universe. We're so sophisticated. We can call it everything else, but if we call it God, don't go there. Right? We really need to grow up. She was earnestly praying to God. And in your mind, if you don't like the word God, substitute it for something else. She was praying to the higher power, the higher intelligence that is there. And she would do this before each takeoff and would have that immense anxiety as the plane reached full thrust and began to penetrate the skies. And for me, which is always awe-inspiring, it's always a spiritual experience for me when I hear those engines just blast off and go into the atmosphere, this huge chunk of a machine, this aluminium, what do you call it, tube, actually lifting off. Miraculous. But the one day that she wasn't scared, the one day when she really was courageous, was the day when one of the engines fell off, because the worst had happened. And she stepped into her courage, and she stepped into her leadership. And this is your moment now. In whatever sphere of influence you have, in your home, in your life, with your children, in your community, we need more and more people to step up and to speak up. To speak up not as ideologues, not as people that need to prove a point, but to say, hey, yeah, this is what I think. This is what I know to be true. This is my lived experience. Don't let others shout you out. Right? Put it out there. Share. Don't be fearful. So this really is an opportunity for global courage. If we don't let this global crisis hijack our limbic system, we can seize the opportunities it presents, and many are doing so already. Many are letting go of unhealthy attachments, downsizing, assisting the less fortunate, recognizing what is truly important, and seeing the world through a different lens, because the world will never be the same again. And they're stepping into leadership. So when we begin to see the bigger picture, when we can disconnect from the fear and the panic and the confusion, and we can take a metaphysical, philosophical worldview, zoom out a little bit, we have the permission to slow down and zoom out. But this is something that our limbic system, our amygdala, was not designed to do. The amygdala is designed to be hyper-focused on cues of threat. And it has a very narrow bandwidth with which when we're possessed by the amygdala, when we're in a sympathetic nervous system state of fight or flight, it shuts down empathy and spirituality and care, and we become callous. We become primal. We will buy every item in the store and leave our elderly neighbor without. They will go hungry as long as my belly is full. So what are the materialist myths being shattered by COVID-19? What are the myths of this materialistic worldview, this reductionistic worldview, this atomistic worldview that has atomized and crushed human experience into its most base parts around earning and success and the individual and aim for the stars and you are your own God? And what are the myths? Well, I've got a list here that I've compiled. And again, this is the time to be bold. This is the time to say, hey, it really can't get any worse than this. Right? What is happening to the human family from death, disease, destruction, famine, the potential for martial law, oppression. So what are these myths that COVID-19 is shattering? Well, paper money, fiat money, and debt create wealth and prosperity. That's a big one. That's a big myth being shattered. Diseases are genetically determined. No, they're not. There's a reason why Prince Charles, who is 71 and has contracted COVID, practically has a zero chance of ending up in ICU and being on a respirator. And if the Prince of Wales is watching, I wish him all the best. It's not about him. It's illustrating a point about the inequality here and the determinants of health are not genetic. We are the materialist conception of disease, about disease being determined and being genetic, has been completely obliterated. It's untenable, scientifically untenable. Another myth, as long as I'm okay, that is all that matters. As long as I have my home stocked up, it doesn't work that way anymore. Because your neighbor who's going hungry, or the person in the other suburb or county who's going hungry, now threatens you and your wealth and your prosperity, because we are one body.